everyone. Welcome back to TTT, the Talking Transport Transformation podcast, brought to you by TUMI, the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative. Like most urban areas, Tirana, the capital city of Albania, has experienced fast urban growth and uncontrolled urbanization in the last few decades. Recognizing the risks of this development for people's movement in the city, Tirana's leadership has started to focus on improving sustainable mobility. Ensuring a safe and healthy future for its citizens is one of the priorities of Tirana's leadership. In 2020, the city published its Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, focusing on several key actions. These include fostering public transport, pushing cycling and micromobility, promoting smart mobility, and planning urban mobility for the needs of the youth. On today's episode, we are delighted to welcome Anuela Ristani. Anuela is the Deputy Mayor of Tirana for Foreign Relations. She joined the public administration in 2014 as General Director of the National Youth Service and was appointed to the position of Director of the Cabinet of the Mayor of Tirana. In her current role as Deputy Mayor, she advocates strongly for sustainable mobility. She particularly encourages improving walkability and designing a child-friendly city. Anuela will take us on a tour to Tirana and introduce us to the city's unique vision for sustainable urban mobility. So, let's listen in.
Hi, Anuela. It's an honor to have you at our TUMI podcast.
Hi. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Great to hear that. So, Anuela, Tirana is one of the fastest growing cities in Europe. It currently ranks third place and is also the fastest growing city of Albania with a population of almost 1 million inhabitants, if I'm not mistaken. And to start our conversation with, I'd like to know from you, what has been the impact of this population growth on urban mobility over the last few years? And also, what does this growth mean for the current state of mobility in the city of Tirana?
Well, of course, Tirana has grown from 200,000 inhabitants in the early 90s to 1 million. So basically quintupled in population. And not just mobility, but everything that you could think of that we share in a city is impacted by developing 5 times faster than the actual infrastructure. Which means that you have to share the same road would have to be shared by 5 times more people. The same schools would have to be shared by 5 times more people. The same resources have to be shared by 5 times more than what they used to be. And the problem with that is that it didn't necessarily have a plan. So all of this came as a shock. Nobody had predicted that we would grow so fast so soon. And everybody did their best. You know, people who didn't have homes, they built wherever they could find some land. And others who had apartments, already existing apartments, they had to share, you know, the playgrounds or the parks downstairs with people who needed to park a lot more. And the biggest change was that we weren't allowed to have any private property during communism, which meant that nobody here owned personal vehicles. And all of a sudden, everybody could afford to have a personal vehicle. So we're now from 17 maybe, or with all utility vehicles in the early 90s, we maybe had 100 roughly vehicles going around the city. Now we have 200,000 and counting. And so you can imagine the shock that does to urban mobility and how it has to digest all of this, you know, new additions, because the roads were the same. They were just invaded by 200,000 vehicles. The space was just the same. So it was just invaded by 200,000 vehicles who all of a sudden needed not just to move, but also to park themselves somewhere. And so it has been a challenge. For many years, people thought that, you know, nothing could be done. But there is hope and things can be done. And how they are done, they should develop in an integrated way. So, you know, you cannot just wake up one morning and say it's not efficient to have 200,000 cars. We get rid of them. Obviously, we cannot do that. Nobody has successfully done that so far. But what we can do is to create enough likability for public transport or other alternative means of transport in order to solve this problem. And so that's from where we've come from, and that's actually where we're headed, which I'm sure you have a next question for that.
Yeah, thanks for this first overview. So I see that especially the number of vehicles has grown over the past. And of course, with that, the challenges have risen. So from your point of view, you mentioned the attractiveness of public transport and also, of course, other modes of transport. How are you as a municipality trying to improve this attractiveness? Is there also something you need about Tirana's approach to sustainable mobility?
What is unique about Tirana's approach to sustainable mobility is exactly the history where we're coming from. None of us had a private vehicle. None of us had their own cars when we were growing up. The city was basically walkable, and it still is. The city is busable, and it still is. What makes it less attractive or more attractive is not necessarily a question of change in terms of the circumstances or the conditions. It's more of a approach to attitude. When you see the vehicle as a trophy, then you don't necessarily use it because you need to use it. You use it because you need to make a statement for using it. So that is something that we're fighting, and that is what makes Tirana unique. Changing this mindset that if you are using public transportation, or if you're using a bike, or if you're walking, does not make you a second-class citizen. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, you declare war to cars in any way possible, urban-wise. So, if nobody is able to park for free in metropolitan Tirana today, as we speak, which was not the case 5 years ago, 6 years ago. You could basically just park your car anywhere you wanted and occupy that space, and you didn't have to pay anything for it. So, we know cars are parked 99% of their lifetime, and they are only used up to like max 3%. And so that is not something you do now. But more than that, not just on-street paid parking, but basically you cannot park on-street at all. So, if you wanted to show your car as a trophy, now that you have to park underground, and all of our public parking is underground, it doesn't look like a trophy anymore because nobody knows which one is your car. When you're going out to clubs and when you're going out in public spaces and when we're going to the theater, because you just have to hide it underneath. So instead of that, you can just take a bike, and it's this example that I think Gil Peñalosa, who is a big actor in sustainable city living and parks and walkability, mentions all the time. If you see good-looking people riding bikes, then that's a message you've made it. So we've turned bikes into a very attractive tool to have, because if you can bike on a protected bike lane, that means that you can bike very comfortably. You could still wear your heels when you bike. You could still dress nicely when you bike, because you're not going to fight with all these fumes from the cars going in and out. You have your own lane, and there's no obstacles. The same way we do with enlarging pedestrian space and enlarging the sidewalks. In some of these main arteries in the city, we've doubled the space of the sidewalks, and we've taken away all the space that cars would have used before for pre-parking or for double lanes. We're in a city. In the city you walk. In the city you share the space with one another. In the city you interact. And it's very difficult for you to interact with people when you're driving. But it's very easy to do that when you're walking, or when you're biking, or when you're using public transportation. So yes, the mindset needs to be changed, but there are certain conditions that you need to fill out before that mindset changes. And when the city as a whole or the administration puts an emphasis and really values, also in monetary and in budget terms, pedestrian space, bike lanes, and public transportation, that means that this importance is more is more up on the list compared to serving people who use their own vehicles. So, if we want to prioritize something or somebody, we have to exactly prioritize the ones that do not have thousands and thousands of euros to spend on a vehicle, but they have the same rights to be citizens, respected citizens of this common space that we call the city. So by prioritizing them in everything that we decide, in all of our investments, the cars or where they're going to be going or how they're going to be moving are our last priority. First of all, we make sure that pedestrian space is there. Second of all, we make sure that all the sidewalks are walkable, even though not just by people who are adults and grown-ups, but also for the ones that have impaired abilities and or kids or strollers and stuff like that, so they're not interrupted. And bike lanes are there in all of our new infrastructure, in everything that we're doing. We make sure that there is a dedicated bike lane that is fully protected. And all of that takes priority before you even start to think about accommodating these 200,000 vehicles. And in terms of numbers, these 200,000 vehicles in the city of Tirana do the same job in terms of numbers as 300 buses that deliver bus services for the people of the city. So can you imagine the disbalance of service that, 300 buses against 200 vehicles? And that kind of thinking and this kind of, evaluation and this kind of analysis makes you realize that, yes, it does make sense to prioritize these guys because they are just moving with 300 buses. And these other guys, same number, same citizens, same rights, are instead polluting multiple times, disturbing multiple times, and interfering in this common space and this common interaction that we have in the city in very unfriendly ways, if I may say. So, yeah, I don't know if it is specifically different on what we're doing here, but that's definitely the way we're approaching this problem.
Well, that sounds very encouraging, actually. And I really agree to everything you said about prioritizing investments for pedestrians and cyclists. And also what I like is your war on cars. That's a very brave statement. I'm sure a lot of car users wouldn't agree, but that's also, I believe, what is important, that you take up on this war and really hide away this status symbolism which still exists in many countries and cultures about using cars, right? Instead of more sustainable modes of transport like walking, cycling, and taking the public transport systems, of course. What you also mentioned is road safety, and you mentioned children, for example. And that's, I believe, also a topic which is very important for you personally and also for the city of Tirana. And I would be interested to know, and of course our listeners as well, how you approach that topic and how is it also related to sustainable mobility from your point of view?
We are a culture that is very big on family. And when we say family, like the central item there is children. But we weren't behaving as if that was true. So, in an analysis that we ran in 2015, when you ask parents, what's the most important thing in your life? They would say, my kids. Of course, that's what every parent would say. And when we ask them, do you think you're spending more money on your kids than on anything else when it comes to your household income? They say, yes, of course I am. But then when you do the numbers, you actually find out that people are spending more money on what? Their cars instead of kids. And in a culture like ours, that was a little bit shocking. That was a little bit like saying, oh, you guys are not as good parents as you used to be, or as you think you would be, just because of this one fact. If you're spending, I don't know, on average 200 euros a month to maintain your car, to park, to renovate, whatever, for gas, and all those things, and you're not spending nearly as much, or not even half of that amount for your kids, that means that there's something wrong in here. So what do you do, however? Because the argument would be, well, one of the reasons why I use my vehicle and then make everybody's life in the city more miserable is just because of my kids. And one of the most surprising things that we found in running our analysis was parents drive their kids to school, although they could be living very, very close to the school, where the school might be very close to their apartment, to their place, because they are afraid of all of this movement. So there's a lot of traffic. So they want to make sure that their kids are safe. And the best way to assure that their kids are safe is through driving them. Now, you can imagine how much of a vicious circle that creates, because you're driving your kids to school because other parents are driving their kids to school, and more parents are driving their kids to school because more parents are driving their kids to school. So, it's very schizophrenic in the way it works, because you're basically contributing to the same problem by making it bigger. And so one of the things that cities around the world are doing, and we have started to do, is how about we ensure that nobody drives their kids to school, and instead kids can safely go to the school nearest them. When we're talking about public schools in Tirana are almost in every neighborhood. Other than being like that, even in the newest parts of the city, we have taken this action of building. I think we have 20 new schools coming up, and in a city like ours, that's a huge number. So in terms of proximity to the place, to the neighborhood, that is a fulfilled criteria. So any kid can go to public school, can walk to public school. The question is how we make that safe. And the way we make that safe is by really not allowing for anyone not to go in a safe way, which means, create the conditions where they can safely walk. So what we're doing right now, and we've tested it in successfully tested it in one particular school, and we have 9 on the pipeline, is Streets for Kids. This initiative that looks at the street, or at the streets around surrounding the school, and closes them for cars, or allows only one lane passage, and then it creates physical barriers for other vehicles to enter a certain zone. So it's kind of like they have in the US, like school zones where you don't drive up to a certain speed or whatever. But this is exactly prohibiting vehicles to even enter that area, which means that even if the kids are running out of school, it's still safe. They're not running on the streets. Kids of certain ages and emotions and circumstances, but also they can safely walk, so that we put an end to this vicious circle where we think of our kids and the best way to drive them to school because others are driving. And so if nobody's driving, that means that everybody is similarly safe. So that is one of the things that we're doing. The other thing that we're doing, which is more for the grown-ups than for the kids, is basically creating play spaces. In a city that has 1 million inhabitants, obviously you have like 300,000 kids, more or less, from 0 to 16. In our city, we have no playgrounds. So, if you wanted to send your kids to or have them play, you would go to this private places. We'd have to drive somewhere, park somewhere, shopping malls and things like that. So obviously that didn't help with a sustainable and mobile city. So what we do is we have a deal with our citizens and we say, if you can make space in your neighborhood, give up some of that backyard or some of that fencing that you have in your neighborhood, then if you find us a space, we will build a playground for your own neighborhood. Now, how does this help in terms of mobility? Well, kids, if they have attractions that are close to where they're living, and they can walk and they have this sense of freedom, obviously that is a lot more healthier and a lot more efficient for all. But from the perspective of parents, really being able to entertain your child without necessarily making big movements throughout the city, which are a waste of time, a waste of resources, require possibly private vehicles moving in and out, parking and whatnot. You're basically giving them a chance to, first of all, gain independence, and second of all, have a real good quality of free time. Because, we know from studies and everything else that play is the most important element in the growth and the healthy growth of children. But play without the need to, being transported long ways and with more independent access to it is even better. And so that's why it's important to have the spaces close to where you're living. That's why it's important to have this micro space, micro city in the neighborhood where you're living. Is the concept of the mixed usage of space, which is very commonly accepted now in urban development, which means you do not have neighborhoods that are just for the financial district or just for residential district or just for strawberries. You have mixed use of the space, because the mixed use of the space, such as residential space plus parking plus playgrounds plus schools in the proximity, really creates a healthy environment because it doesn't require huge mobility efforts. I know that answers it.
Absolutely, it does. Thanks. And also, is there a city, you mentioned a lot of initiatives now with the Safe Streets for Kids projects and also the play zones. Where do you get your ideas from? Is there a city that acts as a role model maybe in terms of planning and also implementation of sustainable mobility for Tirana?
We are looking at different cities on different elements. A city that it's a good model is a city that is livable. We have collaborated with a lot of cities that rank really high in their livability. One of them is Vienna, for example, is a very good example that has managed to do this really well. But we've worked with Dutch cities on our bike lanes and our minimum grid for our bikes. We've been looking at places like Barcelona, and obviously, the Paris, with all the revolution that is doing right now with closing the streets for cars. So we look at different cities on different topics. But I think that today, all cities are looking into very, very similar initiatives. So it's not a matter of, a few years ago, this would be like revolutionary. Now I think every mayor is very aware of the importance of sustainable mobility and sustainability overall, because sustainability is more than just, keeping your pollution in check. It's more than making economic sense. It's about what's really enjoyable, and we should be enjoying cities. It's ultimately the testament of life. We live to be with others. We're social beings, and the cities are exactly where we practice that. And the measure for how sustainable your city is completely correlated to how livable your city is. So there's still not an example of a city that has not thought of sustainable mobility, but still ranks high on livability and on public health and all these parameters that we evaluate, quality of life. Unless there's anything revolutionary telling us that this is not the case, and there's no studies to support that. That means that, these two things are interchangeable and they're both important and they complement each other. So it's not just about mobility, it's about life.
That's so true. So you're really advocating here for more sustainable mobility as a backbone for more livable cities. And I, of course, I'm fully, as well, sharing this idea as part of the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative. So for my last question in this episode, I would like to look into the future of urban mobility in Tirana and ask you, how will it look like maybe in 10 years? What's your vision for the city and how do you plan to get there?
Well, the vision for the city is obviously the reduction at max of the usage of private vehicles. We are adding new lines for public transportation with now there are hybrid buses, but hopefully they will move more into electric buses. We are increasing the number of our bike lanes, and the arteries are growing so that they can be better connected with one another. And then, hopefully in a short while, there won't be anywhere where it won't be possible to access through the bike lanes. And we are moving on with our safe pedestrian zones. So my vision for Tirana is basically the vision of the city that we all had painted in our books when we were kids, and we were learning about, how to live in the city. And I'm sure, we've all had different languages, but this picture of a place where you have people on the street saying hi and bye, and you have the pharmacy, and you have the school, and you have the bike, and you have parents walking by with their kids. I think ultimately that's what everybody's looking to, and everybody hopes to do, when you are in this line of work. So, and I think it's very doable in a city like Tirana, which offers all the conditions that you need to fill out in order to make this possible. It has short distances, it's pretty flat, the weather is gorgeous, so there's no big barriers to that. And people are flexible. So hopefully the same way they learned how to move with and how to be owners of a private vehicle very, very fast, hopefully the same way they will learn how to forget about private vehicles very, very fast and instead return into this more sustainable and more pleasant, which is even more important than sustainability, more pleasant and more likable way of living, which is through walking, biking, using public transportation. So hopefully Tirana in 10 years will be exactly like that picture that we would see as kids when we learn about cities.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks so much. It's been really a pleasure talking to you. And
pleasure was all mine.
We will be happy to follow your activities and, of course, also the developments in the urban mobility sector in Tirana. And I wish you all the best to you and the city. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting you again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anuela, for explaining Tirana's vision for the future of urban mobility. We're impressed with what the city has already achieved and are looking forward to hearing more about these innovative and successful projects in Tirana. We hope you all enjoyed today's episode. We enjoyed sharing Tirana's experience in transforming urban mobility. As always, thanks for tuning in and hear you next time.